Sailaja Joshi, Amy Maranville, and Payal Doshi. Welcome to Middle Grade Ninja. I'm thrilled to have all three of you here this evening.
Thrilled to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And I was just telling you before we get started, the two things that esteemed audience knows I never do. I never try to summarize someone else's biography because I'll make a mess of it. And I try never to summarize someone else's book because then those are fighting words. If I get your book wrong, we're really in trouble. So I'm going to ask each of you to give us kind of an overview of yourself. And then we'll start talking about this book and the press and all kinds of wonderful stuff. But Sailaja Joshi, I will ask you to start. If you would give us an overview of your background.
Yeah, so my name is Sailaja Joshi, and I am the CEO and founder of Mango and Marigold Press. We are an award-winning independent press that shares the sweet and savory stories of the South Asian experience. Our mission is to decolonize children's lit and to bridge the accessibility gap in children's literature, one story at a time.
And then, Amy, I'll ask you to give an overview of your background.
Sure. I'm Amy Maranville. Hello, everybody. I am the CEO and founder of a small writing and editing company called Kraken Communications. I'm a big fan of children's literature, always have been, and I actually have a master's degree in children's lit. So when Sailaja became interested in starting her own company, she and I sat down and had a coffee and talked about what it would entail. And then I said, okay, well, go and make books and good luck. And she came back and asked me to write some of the first books for Mango and Marigold. So I started off writing some books, and then I sort of transitioned into the senior editor role. And so I am the main editor for most of the Mango and Marigold books at this point.
And last but certainly not least, not on this show, let's talk to the author, Payal Doshi. Please give us an overview of your background.
Hi, everyone. I'm Payal Doshi, and my debut novel, Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar, is out May 2021. I write middle grade fantasy books. I have a master's degree in creative writing from the New School in New York. I came into writing totally by accident. I was always a voracious reader, but never thought about writing seriously as a profession. But I soon came to realize that there just isn't any literature out there, especially in children's literature, that has any focus on Indian kids or South Asian kids, especially as protagonists of the story. And I wanted to change that. And I also wanted to do it in a fun way, showing that Indian kids also have a lot of fun and can be the heroes of their own stories. And so I came about to writing Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar. And I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I have a wonderful husband, and I live in Minneapolis.
I love it.
And Payal, just follow-up question, when did it occur to you that you should be writing? What did you start off with as your passion, and when did you transition to I must be a writer?
Do you want the long version?
How about the medium?
Yeah, the medium length one.
So, I didn't have a passion, to be really honest. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of those kids, who wrote stories as an 8-year-old or a 5-year-old. I didn't do any of that. I studied business management. I have a master's in business management. I was in the UK when I was doing my master's in business management, and it was catered towards creative industries. And as an internship, I interned at Pan Macmillan Publishers in London. And that's when the first light bulb sort of went off in my head, thinking, hey, wait, I can make reading a profession? Like, wait, what? And that's when I was so intrigued by the whole publishing world that I knew when I came back to India. I should have mentioned in my bio that I am Indian, and I am was raised in Mumbai, and I moved to the US about 8 years ago. So anyway, back then I moved back home to Mumbai, and the book publishing industry is in Delhi, and I didn't want to move again, so I joined the magazine publishing industry. I worked at Vogue and other lifestyle magazines. And that's where I sort of started writing articles and, sort of tickling my writing bug, so to speak. And it was in that time that I was equal parts frustrated with my job. I absolutely came to a point to detest writing articles that I was asked to write about, or that was based on a magazine's theme, or some such sort of criteria. And I decided to write what I wanted to write. And I just opened up my computer one day. I remember it was a Sunday morning, and I just wrote whatever came to mind. And what came to mind was literally, it still exists in the actual book today, obviously far more refined and polished. But I wrote the story about this feisty little girl called Rhea in Darjeeling, India. And when I wrote that, I wrote 2 paragraphs, and I had never felt more happy in my life and fulfilled, really. So I went back and I drafted out the whole plot, which still is the exact same plot, several changes. There's a deeper story to this, which I can expand on later, but essentially, I wrote out this plot and I started writing it, and I wrote about 70,000 words in, and I was like, okay, I think I'm going to need a little more help. And so I applied to the US for an MFA in creative writing. And so, and ever since then, I never looked back. I just went on and on. It took a long time to finish this book because a lot of life happened along the way. But that's when I realized, that was that moment when I wrote those 2 paragraphs, like sitting on my dining table in my living room, just writing what I wanted to write.
You must not do anything halfway. I'm fascinated. You need a little help. That to me is, let's call a neighbor, let's get a relative to read this over. Nope, straight to getting an MFA the whole way.
I know. She's like, I wrote 70,000 words, and then I needed a little bit of help, so I got an MFA from the new school.
Well, thank you. It seems cool, but at the time I was just like, what am I doing? I think it's very important to also note that I wrote those characters, like in when I wrote the 2 paragraphs, as white characters. They were called Rose Bennett, and the brother was Bryant Bennett, and the parents were John and Hyacinth Bennett. And they had a housekeeper named Suki, I remember. And I didn't think twice about it. I wrote 70,000 words with white characters. And then before I decided to get my MFA, I applied to a writing workshop in one of the universities in Bombay. And I was so excited to get my chapters workshopped. And when it came to my turn, I remember the teacher, she almost had a look of disgust on her face. And she was just like, why are they white? Why aren't you writing about Indian kids? And I kid you not, I had not thought about that at all, even once. And I was so shocked by the fact that she wasn't like, this is nice or great or, good job. And that she had just pinpointed this one aspect that none of my characters were white, were Indian. And I was writing about nothing that I had experienced in my life. That it really shook me. And I went back, and I was not the only one in this workshop that had the same criticism. There were many of us who had written stories with white characters in them. And I went back and I thought about it, and then it really struck me that I hadn't realized that everything that I had consumed as a child, and I love reading, and I love the books that I read, like there is no denying that, but it had whitewashed me into thinking that that's the type of stuff, or that's the type of content that I should be writing when telling my stories. And it really shook me that I hadn't thought about that. Like, it wasn't a conscious choice to write white characters. It's not that you shouldn't if you are, if you're not white, but that I hadn't even thought about it. And I think that was the time it became a mission. Like, my passion became a mission to write stories that celebrate Indian culture and South Asian culture and heritage in a way that doesn't victimize us, which oftentimes happens. And that isn't to say that that's good or bad. This is just another facet that I wanted to, bring out and put out into the world, that Indian kids have wonderful lives as well, full lives as well, and go through the same things that kids all over the world go through. It's very universal, and that they should also be heroes. They should also be the main characters of a story, and people will see that it doesn't matter that they are Indian or not, that a kid will relate to a kid. So that's the story.
Sailaja, this strikes me as the perfect opportunity for me to ask you about 1001 diverse books and your efforts to bring greater diversity to our literature.
Yeah, so I think for us early on in the inception of Mango and Marigold Press, and when we were still called Bharat Babies, I quickly heard from a lot of different communities, a lot of librarians, a lot of teachers who were just like, oh my God, these books are amazing. I just wish I could afford them. And our books are pretty typically priced, and it wasn't about the fact that our books were expensive. It was the fact that they didn't have the money or access to resources to get their books into the hands of really the communities that needed them the most. And so last year, right around this time, actually, 2001 Diverse Books campaign. And so my commitment as CEO of Mango and Marigold Press is to donate 1001 new diverse books from each one of our new book launches to communities and literacy organizations that provide help to improve the accessibility gap in children's literature. The way our community can help us on that mission is with each new book launch, with each new pre-order campaign, you can sponsor a book for $10 and it goes to a kid and community in need. And through that campaign, over the past year, we've donated close to 2,000 books just in this past year, which is pretty phenomenal. And we have had the opportunity to bring them to a lot of communities that needed them the most, especially in this time of COVID. We've done a lot of distribution of our books through free meal campaigns. So it's pick up a meal, pick up a book, and have access to stories that reflect your existence, stories that reflect your lived realities, and just new books. For so many children, a new book is a privilege. And I deeply believe that a book can change the world. All it takes is one book to change the course of a child's life. And I want to help to make that happen.
Amy, is there anything you'd like to add about your commitment to this is a mission of Middle Grade Ninja, is to help encourage additional diversity within literature, and I know you're on board as well. And the reason I know you're on board is because you're editing this book. So, what is your commitment to diversity? What's your experience on increasing diversity? And I'd also like to know your thoughts on where publishing is in terms of are we approaching something like where we need to be, or we got millions of miles yet to go?
Well, I think that it is closer to millions of miles than it should be, is the short answer. So from my perspective, I'm white. And my background, when I was studying children's literature, I was very lucky in that I went through the program at a place called Simmons here in Boston. And one of the staunch elements of that was to start thinking in terms of colonialism and in terms of what messaging was being sort of targeted in the text that we were reading. And that really sort of changed my perspective. And I was very lucky in terms of in a myriad of ways, right, with my background in literature. But when I started working with Sailaja, I think my perspective changed even more, because I was thinking about specific children, whereas before I was thinking sort of in a broader sense. Now I was looking at the children around us. So I forgot to mention this in my bio as well, but I have 2 children. That's how I met Sailaja in the first place.
I have 2 children too. I did. We
forgot.
didn't
It's
collect
fine.
it. We didn't forget. I'm just like, listen, I'm with them all day.
I know.
Let's talk about something else.
They get enough, right?
I am with you. I also have a child. I don't wish to talk about him during writing time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my older son is in the same grade as Sailaja's oldest child, who's her daughter, Ojo. And I think that I really hadn't thought about the impact on individual children, right? I thought about the political element, and I thought about why it mattered for the broader context of literature, right? But I hadn't really thought about what it meant for kids to see themselves in books. And Sailaja can tell you that in the early days, one of the big things that we did was festivals. That was like a big part of what we were doing. And a lot of times it was just me and Sailaja sitting at a table, and the reactions that we got to the books, they really changed the way that I saw the world. The reactions, mostly in the positive, kids seeing themselves on the covers of books where they had never seen themselves before, kids seeing their names on books.
Adults, I think that
Adults,
like
Yeah.
adults, like we Amy and I would regularly have at least one adult be brought to tears in our booth, because they were like, they were like, are you kidding me? There's like 5-10 books about South Asian kids that aren't just about Diwali, that aren't just about this one specific holiday. And I was like, yeah, take your pick. They were like, I get to pick?
It wasn't, and it wasn't just South Asian kids either. Like, nope. I wasn't there, Sailaja, but do you remember the story about the Padmini is Powerful, the mirror, in the last page?
Oh, yeah. So one of our books that's still out of print, it's called Padmini is Powerful. It's written by Amy, and it's this wonderful, empowering board book. And at the end of the book, there's like this little faux mirror, that like toddler board books have. And it says, Padmini is powerful, and so are you. And so you see yourself in the book. And I was at the LA Times Festival of Books, and this wonderful family, Latino family came, was hanging, and the mom was a single mom, and because she had told me that, and as we were talking, and she opened up that book and read through it. She's like, this is so cute. This is so cute. And then at the end, it says, Padmini is powerful, and so are you. And she saw her face in this little mirror, and she just started crying. And she was like, do you know how rare it is for my brown boys to hear that they are powerful? They hear that they are gangsters. They hear that they can't. And you are telling them from birth that they can. And I was like, yeah, I am. And that there are many powerful moments like that I think certainly keep me going in the work that we do.
Yeah.
Well, I'm fascinated by this idea that you're writing white characters and you've got other people in the class that are writing white characters as well. When you had this realization, did that make you angry, or did that just simply fuel you with a passion to go and do better? What was your reaction for all the authors listening that maybe have had similar circumstances in their journey?
It did anger me. But it fueled me. It really fueled me. Like I said before, I wouldn't go back in time and change the books that I read, assuming that there were books published back then, even with, that would have kids that look like me. I cherish those books, and the message that I want to send to people who have had a similar experience like that, and I know they have. I mean, I can guarantee you that, especially with any Indian author out there, for sure they've had it. Is that, don't let it anger you, but in a positive way. The message that I want to give is that, we're all equal in the sense of our struggles and our ambitions and our desires and our our life and our friends and the want for family, that it isn't about one or the other. It's just about having all represented. I don't want to take away from white representation or say that's bad. That absolutely not. It's just that we need more of other cultures being represented. And that's how, and I also see this more as, the term that's very frequently used in the US is, POC, or person of color, or author of color. I see it as person of a different culture, or person of a different, or author of a different culture, because I feel like as people, we go through very similar experiences, and we have such amazing cultures and different traditions world over, white, not white, which I think need to be celebrated and also showcased to the world. And so I would say, let that fuel you and do the best you can in your most authentic way, in the stories that you want to tell about your own experiences and your own culture.
Amy, I'm going to pivot back to you while we're talking writers' journeys, and then we'll get into this book. I haven't forgotten we've got a book coming out here in May. We gotta definitely talk about. But Amy, I'm going to ask you. You're here tonight primarily as an editor, but you've written 6 picture books. What has been your author's journey?
Well, I'm a very varied writer. I've written a lot of different kinds of books, and I've also ghostwritten a lot, which is something that I think a lot of new authors should consider as a possibility when they're just starting out. It's just basically writing for somebody else, writing under somebody else's name. My journey for picture books really began with Mango and Marigold. I never planned on writing picture books. I was planning on writing young adult books. In fact, that was my focus in my master's program, was like a specific focus in young adult, but you don't have a choice. You have to take picture book. It is very intense art history class, actually. But when Sailaja approached me and we talked about me writing a couple of the books, it became this really incredible journey, because one of the ways that we decided to go about it was to have Sailaja's mother sit down with me and tell me some of the stories that Sailaja was interested in turning into picture books. So we went through, I think we went through like 20 or 30 different stories. And I took notes and I asked questions about things that were crucial versus things that were not crucial. I should mention I have a background in the corporate world. So I worked for Deloitte for 13 years. And so I had a background in sort of how to pull things out towards a goal, right? So like we have a goal here, and the goal is to create a book. So let's think about what we need to do to get to that book. And Sailaja's mother was amazing and told these incredible stories. And we settled on Hanuman and the Orange Sun as the first book, because I thought it would have that great kind of action element. And I thought that kids would really like that. But we did go back and forth a little bit. Sailaja can speak to that as well, because there were some things in the older stories that really don't work for children's books. And
it's so like the child getting like shot.
Yeah.
And then there being no recovery. And you're like, we can't. I was like, I can't do that as a picture book. Let's.
Well, we had a whole conversation about arrows, like people being shot with arrows. And Sailaja's mom would be like, but they're evil, so it's okay. And we were like, what?
We were like, maybe not. That's
and
fine.
then they bled out. Sleep tight, kid. Good night.
I know. I was like, this is a bedtime story, Emma. And she'd be like, it's fine. It's not a big deal. You grew up listening to it. And I was like, and I have trouble falling asleep still. Like, we can't do that, Mom. We can't do that.
So we did wind up going with Hanuman, which was a really wonderful experience writing that book. And we pulled in one of the biggest illustrators that we've had in Mango and Marigold as well. And one of the things that Mango and Marigold is very unique in is that the author and the illustrator work together a lot. So we know each other, and we get to kind of coordinate with each other. We have like little inside jokes with each other, and we sort of get to experience like the whole picture of building a book together. And Tim Palin was absolutely instrumental in bringing that book to life.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And you know, with Rhea, we're going to see that as well, I think, with some of the illustrations. I think they're really bringing it into a new place. It's just really amazing to see.
Yeah.
Sailaja, we've heard from the writers and their journey. Let's hear your journey to founding Mango and Marigold Press, even though I know it wasn't called that originally.
Yeah. So it started with the birth of my daughter, or the pregnancy I had with my first daughter. And so I am a bibliophile. I love books. I love words. I love all of that. And so when I was pregnant, it was really natural. I had a library themed baby shower. And as I was putting books on my registry for that baby shower, I wanted to put books that reflected my culture and history and heritage. I grew up South Asian and Hindu, and identify as Indian. And I have a sociology degree background in Asian, like learning about Asian cultures and communities. And I just couldn't believe that once I started to look at those books that were available to me, that the books didn't reflect my culture, my history, my heritage. They were developmentally inappropriate, culturally inaccurate, culturally insensitive, and it was frustrating. And so I was pregnant at the time, about to start a PhD program, and I was like, whatever. This is gonna. And then I became a mom, and I looked at my sweet daughter's face, and I was like, she's never gonna see herself on the cover of a book. She's not. And that really frustrated me. That really, really frustrated me. And so I remember posting in a mom's group. I was like, does anyone know anything about children's literature? And Amy wrote yeah, I have a master's degree in it. What's up? And so we made an arrangement to get coffee and crepes. And I told her, she brought like all of these books. I remember her bringing books, and she showed me stuff, and I was like, cool. She's like, go write. And I remember trying to write, and I was like, this is really hard. I can't do this. Writing stinks. And so I went back to Amy, and I was like, Amy, maybe, do you want to help me write it? And she was like, maybe, yeah, let's think about it. And so she's like, well, yeah. She's like, maybe.
Is that what I said?
I think you weren't like, yeah, let's do it. You were like,
I was like, I don't know.
Cool. Yeah, you were like, whatevs. Because like I didn't have money, I didn't have a business plan, I didn't have anything. But what I did have was this passion to change something. And so you fast forward about 6 months later, I leave my PhD program. I get $1,000 grant as a startup capital, which allows me to hire Tim Palin. Amy generously signs on with the promise of an advance. I don't even think we had a contract, frankly.
It was fine.
She knew where I lived. It was fine. We get a story together. Tim does some illustrations, and I then showed it to a friend who was also an investor. And I was like, listen, I'm trying to do this thing. And he was like, cool. More. And it ended up being that once we launched the pre-order campaign for Hanuman and the Orange Sun, he gave us our first $5,000 in startup capital. We then closed out the funding we needed within 2 days, I think, of that campaign, maybe 3. And really, this is all to say it started in moments, little moments of irritation, of frustration that have created this movement. So now Mango and Marigold Press will be 6 years old in November. We, by November, will have released or started the pre-order campaign for 20 books. 6 years old, 20 books, multiple awards. We have expanded our offering to include young adult, middle grade fiction, which is just amazing. all while being bootstrapped. I have no background in publishing. I have a business major. I'm a sociologist and anthropologist. All I have is an entrepreneurial spirit. And through that, we have, instead of following the way publishing traditionally does it, have decided to charter our own path and do it our way. And that means that our books get into the hands of children who need them the most.
How can somebody reach out to you and suggest their project, their dream to become a part of your press? And what are the submission requirements? And what are you looking for?
Yeah, so as a South Asian focused publishing house, we prioritize own voice authors and illustrators. Does that mean we won't take a not own voice author or illustrator? No, I think Amy is a really lovely example of that. But there has to be a really good reason for a lot of that. And so that is a good thing to know. Next, we do work in some ways as a traditional publishing house, and in that way is we expect submissions that are polished, refined. That means provide us with a cover letter, provide us with the manuscript, have your query letter, have it shopped around, have edited it. I probably get 15 to 20 submissions a week easily. When one of our books is in the news, sometimes that will increase. And it always shocks me the number of people who haven't spent time learning my name, who incorrectly identify me as male. Just some of your basics, please have that. Past the own voices, I'm looking for stories that share the South Asian experience. I specifically identify our company like that because it's purposefully broad. The South Asian experience can be so many different things, and we're excited to share that story. So does it have to be extraordinary and fantastical? It can be. Can it be mundane and everyday? Absolutely. We are looking to share the stories of the South Asian experience, however and whatever they might be.
And you are accepting unagented submissions.
Let's not be mundane, though. We're not.
Amy's like, as the senior editor, I don't want mundane. I mean mundane in their subject matter.
You mean every day?
Yeah.
Everyday subject matter. Real fiction is fine. Realistic fiction, fantasy is fine. The biggest thing is we want to see diversity, specifically something that celebrates South Asia. And we also want to see empowerment in the books. We want to see children being their own heroes as much as possible, I think. Sailaja, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's certainly about the piece of a child being the hero of their story, and how and where that's articulated can just be a little girl gaining confidence to go down the tallest slide in Hoboken. And it can also be about a little girl standing up in front of herself in front of a bully and being proud of her background and heritage. Both of those are books that exist in Mango and Marigold's canon, and they do showcase children being strong through themselves. And I think that's really important.
I think Steve's audience is hearing this and they're thinking, oh my gosh, 20 submissions a week, and you're only doing 20 books since 2014. But you, esteemed audience, are going to mention that you heard Sailaja and Amy on this very program, and that's going to put you right to the front of the list. You've got an end. You're going to be all right.
Possibly. Amy and Payal can tell you that my inbox is just a nightmare. Like my emails, it's rough.
But we do read the submissions, and we do talk.
I read every single one. Yeah. I read every single one, and I'm picky.
Well, when you go to make when you get that Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar, which is available in May, when you get a beautiful hot story like that you just must publish, do you both read it? What's the process like for approval?
So the interesting piece with Rhea, and so you're going to get the hot tip of this story. I think this is the first time these two guys know it, but they only recently learned it. So Payal submitted her manuscript to us about a year and a half ago now, June of last year, 2019. And we got it. And she was sort of like, listen, I know you don't do, at that time we were still Barth babies and we had no middle grade on our offering. And while I had been planning the brand change and our shift, nobody outside of the company knew that. And so she submitted it. And prior to submitting it, I had gone through about 2.5 years of pitching to investors, angels, grants, funding, all of these things. And I'd sort of been finally told no by a round of important investors. And they didn't just say no to the company. They were like, your business is not the type of business we ever fund because it has low returns. And I was like, cool. And so I had reached a point where I was considering just closing up shop. I was like, it's been 5 years. It's been a good round. You tried. And then Payal's book lands in our submission pile. And her letter is just very she clearly did her homework. She read, she knew my name. And then I opened up the manuscript and I was like, wow, this is really good. Really like it, but I don't do middle grade. And then I sent it to Amy and Amy was like, take it now. And I was like, but we don't do middle grade. And she was like, she's like, so? Like what? So
now we do middle grade.
So now we do middle. Yeah, and I think that might have been what you said to me. You're like, so now we do middle grade, and I was like, so now we do middle grade. And so then we did middle grade. Like that's just like I read the book, and I read it, and I was like, this is a great book. I was like, and she's not going to get anywhere in the Big Five. Nobody at the Big Five is reading this. It is getting trashed. And I was like, but I want Ojo to read this. Ojo's my daughter. And I was like, and I want to read this. And I was like, I got to publish it. So that we had conversations. We went back and forth. I last year at this time was going through all of the change we needed to rebrand and change our company name and vision. And then shortly after, I think right before we announced the name change, we announced that Payal Doshi was joining our family. And it was because of her manuscripts that I think, we kept doing what we were doing. I decided to keep going on.
Out of curiosity, why would you think that this wouldn't be a book that the big publishers would touch?
Because it had there was a lot of reasons. I think some of it is it's a longer middle grade book. So there's one of those. There's been a challenge in that space for a lot of authors. Middle grade is also, I think, obviously, this is kind of a new-ish genre in the publishing world compared to some of the other areas of like kids, children, teen literature. Fantasy with a brown female protagonist. There's already 2 series out there, so that's probably all they need in the publishing world. They're not really sure if it's going to sell. Meanwhile, how many white male fantasy protagonists are there in the kids lit, in the children's lit, middle grade lit world? And then I think Payal's a debut author. She's young. She doesn't quite have a following yet. She doesn't have writing. And a lot of that dictates. She was unagented.
Mm-hmm. I can actually speak to that. You're absolutely right, Sailaja. I started querying this book. I think we signed our contract 2020. I started querying this book in 2018. And I actually got a really good response from agents. I had most of my query letters and sample chapters turned into full requests, and some of them were partial requests, but most of them were full requests. And then I would get these really long rejection letters, like 3 months later or 4 months later, just saying that we love the book, we love Rhea, we think you are very talented and your writing style is really good, but every letter started like that, especially the ones that requested the full manuscript. And Granted, at that time, the book was about 95,000 words long, so it was very long for middle grade. And I got 7 revise and resubmits from really good agencies. And, you know, I was very happy that I got such good feedback. Largely, it was like you have to bring the book down to about 50,000 words or 60,000 at most. And I took that challenge on. I mean, I think the next year I had my baby. I had 6 months where I was like really trying to slowly get back, but then I got back into it. I cut down an entire, it was a 3 POV book. I cut it down I took down 1 POV. I rewrote large parts of the book. And then finally, back in 2019, February of 2019, I requeried, and I requeried all of the, I resubmitted to the 7 that were interested. And again, a few months later, I got the rejections, and the common theme was that either my book was not too Indian, because Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar is a book about an Indian kid and about India to an extent, but only 1/3 of the book is set in Darjeeling, because then she portals into this fantastical land, and then she's in this fantastical land. And we can talk more about the land and my inspiration for it later, but it isn't an Indian-inspired land. It's more an East meets West kind of a land. And so I was told that it's not they wouldn't use the words that it's not Indian enough, but they basically said that, they needed more, nuanced, fantastical elements, and that maybe have her spend some more time in India before she goes back. And so that was one of the things. And then, so it was either that they didn't like the balance of it not being too Indian and less Indian. And I didn't know what to do with that. I mean, I agree. One of them very blatantly told me that it's going to be very hard to market your book because it isn't in an Indian fantastical land. And largely the book takes place, again, in this sort of Western, Eastern land, and you only have Indian characters. Another one told me that they have a similar book in their roster already signed up, and though she loves the book, that I can query her for another project later on, but they can't take me on. And I never, again, even in these situations, I never thought twice about it. I was just like, I was so happy that they considered me. I was devastated that they didn't sign me on. And it was only later, after I, had discussions with other writers and other Indian writers and or like diverse writers, where we all had the similar story that why can't there be more than one middle grade fantasy book in your roster for the upcoming year? You have that many different variations of the same thing when it comes to white characters in white books. And so I completely agree with what Sailaja said. It's like, as she was recounting the points, I was just like, yep, it just took me right back. I lost complete faith in my book. I mean, I thought it was definitely not sellable, that it was not good. I mean, I think as an author, especially a debut author, you still feel those things. I still wonder, I'm like, is it good?
It's good. I'm a fan.
It's very good.
Yeah.
I think we'll go ahead and make that the advertisement. Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar, available in May of 2021. Well, I tell you what, while we're here, kind of I think a fun thing to do might be go ahead and let's officially do a summary of what the book is about, and then, because I have your editor here, when you finish, Amy, I'm going to let you improve it, and then because we've got the boss here, I'll ask you to improve both of their descriptions of the book. That sounds like a good plan.
Oh my god, that's terrifying.
This is great.
That's terrifying.
All right, Payal, the pressure's on. Go ahead and give us a description of your novel.
So Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar is a middle grade fantasy novel. It follows Rhea Chetri, a 12-year-old girl from Darjeeling, India, who goes on a quest to find her twin brother who goes missing on the night that they turn 12. In this secret quest, she portals into the magical world of Astranthia, and in there she has to find out what has happened to her brother. She has to grapple with dark truths about her past, her family. She in her to take on the obstacles that come in her way, many of which include evil creatures and evil queens, or one evil queen. And she has to learn the meaning of friendship and trust along the way. And then the reader has to read and find out whether she does save Rohan and the realm of Astranthia.
What do you think, Amy? Improvements? Thoughts?
I would say that from a plot perspective, you nailed it. I would add that it is a story about friendship. It is a story about courage. It is a story about adventure. And it is a story that is very kid forward. So the plot and everything is driven by kids throughout. The children really are the focus of the book. One of the things that Payal mentioned earlier is the East-West element. I think that is crucial to what makes this book successful. It has this absolutely incredible world that Payal has created. It is like nothing I've ever read before. It combines a mix of Indian cultural references with Welsh, with different European and ancient ideas. There is a water horse. I can't remember. Can you pronounce that word for me, please?
It's a Keppeldoor.
Thank you. It's Welsh. And it is one of the greatest middle grade adventure stories I think that has ever been written. And I am a huge fan of middle grade adventure.
Sailaja, your company is riding on this book. What do you think? Did they do it?
First of all, I'm like real jazzed to read this book. I was like, ooh, tell me more. And I was like, oh, right. It's my book. Like we did it. I can read it. I have it. I know where the arc for the book lives. Like, I can do it. How would I improve on it? I think everyone got it spot on. I think I probably would say that Rhea and the Blood of Nectar is Mango and Marigold Press' first middle grade fantasy novel. It shares the story of Rhea with her best friend Leela as they go on a magical quest to help save Rohan, Leela's brother, and find friendship and courage along the way. I don't know if I like that though. It's not an improvement, but it is shorter.
It is shorter. It is shorter.
You know what? My daughter says, you know what? I'm just going to say what my daughter says. Like,
Yes.
Rhea and the Blood of Nectar is a really good story about a girl named Rhea who is scared. She's a little bit brave and she's a little bit scared, is how my daughter like describes her. But she can do it anyways. And that's her. So that's how I'm gonna say it.
I like that.
Yeah, it's good.
This is the first book, and forgive me if I mutilate the same, in the Chronicles of Astranthia series.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, Payal, back to you. How many books do you have planned at this point?
Oh,
I have planned it as a trilogy. And yeah, I'm currently drafting the sequel, the second book.
Sailaja, is it going to happen, or is Payal dreaming?
No, it's happening. I mean, it's happening. It's happening.
let me just point out. Okay, because we had this conversation literally this week. When she says she's drafting, okay, Payal is one of the most detailed writers, and she is so meticulous. It is, I mean, as a person who is not a meticulous person, just in general, to me it is amazing. But I received the draft of the second book this week. Am I allowed to talk about this? I'm looking at your face. I can't tell.
Yeah. I mean, you can share, and you're not talking to me. You're talking to Payal. So like,
I was.
I haven't read it yet.
Sailaja. Payal, are you okay with me saying a couple
Only
things?
with all good things.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm going to say terrible things. Come on. We got on the phone earlier this week because it's been a rough run. We're all a little bit behind on our deadlines for reasons. And I missed a meeting with the lovely Pyle, and she was very understanding about it. So she said, I just want you to look at it and tell me if it's good. She's like, can you just read it and tell me if it's good? Because I need to know that. And I was like, I am going to just open it up. I had a really hard day, and I just started reading it, and I started crying because it was so beautiful and so exciting. Like, the pacing is fantastic. There's a new character who's just amazing in it. And yeah, so the second book is pretty much like, it's a done deal. It's happening. She already wrote half of it at least.
Yes. You heard it.
Cool. Cool.
Oh, by the way, Sailaja, yeah, that
You're like,
yeah.
by the way, Sailaja. Yeah,
By the way, it's
I'm
happening.
here for it. I'm here for it.
So, okay, well, let's go through the process then a little bit. So, Payals, submission comes in. You, Amy, and you, Sailaja, you go back and forth. You both love it. So, how do you reach out to Pyle? And then once you do, what happens next?
Yeah, so I think we reached out to Payal, and then we started chatting. Payal was in India at the time, and you were there for like an extended period, I remember, right? It felt like you were there for a longish time.
I was there for a long time.
Yeah. And I think for a variety of reasons, our communications just were long. There were breaks. They were a little staggered. Some of it was me. Some of it was Payal. But then I was like, I want it. I want it for this season. How fast can you like edit? And she was like, you tell me. And that was that. And I think we worked really hard. I think we announced Payal like early in this year, like the beginning of this year, which is crazy to think. And she edited like crazy, submitted a couple of different edits and revisions. And I got it, and I was like, okay, so we're going to do the cover reveal in September. And she was like, we are? I was like, we are. I think she was terrified that I was still not going to take it for some reason. And that hadn't occurred to me as an option. Like, I was just like, I don't know. Like, let's keep going. But like our process is from start to finish. Payals was, I think she had like a 6-month contract time frame, and maybe 3 or 4. Time makes no sense to me anymore.
Speaking of which, real quick, I should point out that we are talking in October of 2020, but of course, the esteemed audience through the magic of time travel is listening in spring of 2021. Yeah. So hopefully by the time you're listening to this esteemed audience, it's just broken out. COVID-19's been driven back. You're living in a wonderful world. Sorry, I just wanted to.
I know. That's a great point. Like, because we're so like dark and despaired right now, and but yeah, it's better. March is in May, and it's great because Payal's book's coming out. Yeah. But I will say our process is fairly traditional: 3 to 4 months to contract. Once it's contracted, depends on the editing stage because it depends on the book, and then the illustrations sort of depend on there. We currently work at like an 18 to 22 month time frame for us getting contracts, signing authors and illustrators, and getting their books into the hands of the rest of the world.
Payal also had a beta reading, long beta reading process, which for aspiring writers, beta reading is a very important step in the process of creating and getting your books finished. Basically, what it means is that you have people who read your book as readers and give you feedback. So an editor will either do a line by line, which means smoothing out the text or telling you that there are mistakes. And they'll also do some content stuff. But you want someone who's a reader to look at the book and say, I was confused by this, or this didn't seem right. And you want to get those reactions from actual readers. So how many beta readers did we have?
I think 4.
I think it was more than 4.
No, we had 3 from Mango and Marigold.
Oh, yeah, and I had 2.
Okay.
So, yeah, correct. We have 5.
Yeah, which is a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It was a lot. I think my book, I remember the email that I received from Sailaja. Like Sailaja had pointed out that I emailed Mango and Marigold Press, back then was Powered Babies, June of 2019. And then September, I received your email because I had decided that I was going to go and get a mani-pedi that day because I was just, my daughter was born in May. So, it was like I needed to feel a little bit pretty and get out of the house. And my book was going, nowhere with agents. And I had assumed that Mango Marigold Press weren't interested either. And I was getting my my manicure done on my right hand, and my phone beeps. And with my left hand, I see that I've got an email from Sailaja. And she said that I'd love to chat. And you have no idea how many times I had dreamed of reading something like that. That I was in shock. And my heart started pounding. I was so excited. I wanted to leave everything and run back to my car so I could read the email properly. But she said that she really loved the manuscript and she would love to chat with me. And then we arranged. I wrote back saying yes, I'm interested. Yeah. And then I think the thing that Sailaja said, that my only caveat is that you will be our first MG release. And that you will have to work very closely with the design team and the whole team, basically the production team and the design team. And I was like, that's like a fantastic caveat. And I'm, it almost seems fortuitous now that whatever I had, all of the experiences I had previously through my agenting process and stuff like that, when I met, we spoke, Sailaja and I, and then even Amy and I spoke. And when Amy and I spoke, and she told me that she really loved the world. And for me, because that had been my biggest I thought it was the weak spot in my book. And I wrote it because that was my experience growing up in India. And Mumbai is a very urban city. It's a very multicultural city. It's, we have access to all of the media. And so I basically grew up, loving the Backstreet Boys and Keanu Reeves. And I watched a lot of Hollywood movies. But at the same time, I know 4 Indian languages and all of our traditions. And so the life that I lived was very Indian, but also it had a lot of Western influence. All the books that we read were primarily British. And then also from the States. So I had a very East meets West sort of upbringing, and that was my experience. And so when I wrote intuitively, when I wrote Astranthia, it was it was that experience. It was a very global experience is what I call it, like local meets global. And that was my utopia for Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar. And then when I was, when I went through the agenting process, it was my weak spot. And I didn't realize, never wrote the book for it to be marketable. Well, I should have, I guess, but I didn't think about it. They say write what you know, so that's what I wrote. And so when Amy said that she loved the world and that she understood why, like she never questioned for 1 second. She never asked me why did it have Welsh influences along with a bit of, Indian or Eastern, and like she just got it. And that blew my mind. And that was what, and I loved the caveat that Sailaja said, which was like work together because this is my baby. And both those two things combined, I had no doubt in my mind that I wanted to, get it down on paper with Mango and Marigold Press. It found the perfect house, and it didn't matter that they were a smaller independent press. I think that the fact that we're here on your podcast just shows that,
yes, you've made it.
We've made it. We have.
No, I think I think we're hearing a very happy success story. So Amy, other than the 3 of you who more than sounds like qualified to master this book and bring it to full fruition, how many other folks are involved with this, and what's the process from Payal, we love this book, to now you have to break the news, here are the things I want to change?
Oh my God.
Oh, well, so two separate questions there. I would say I can answer the second one, and Sailaja would be a better fit to answer the first one. So sorry. So my job really in the editing process is very content focused. That's really where I focus my energy. So when I worked with Payal, we worked very closely on getting everything where it needed to be from the story perspective. There was, typos and stuff too, but for the most part, it was very focused. Actually not typos. We had a separate person do that, now that I think about it. But we went through line by line on the phone more than once, I would say.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
We had 3 developmental edits. We had one, the first 2 were big picture, but the first one was big picture, where Amy had me, write and make a lot of changes, a lot of fantastic changes. But I remember after hanging up with her and, going through my list, I was just like, okay. I literally took, I think, a week off. I'm just like, I can't deal with this. This is like, wait, what? But that developmental edit, it was more, I think it added depth to the book that the book was lacking. And I think we did, and then it was a smaller round and then a smaller round, but that was all 3 content, like developmental. And then we did line edits, and then we had betas, which then resulted in further big picture and small picture edits. Then there was copy editing.
Smaller one. Mostly small.
Yeah,
it felt big.
It felt big at the time. I think when you're revising a book for the millionth time, you're like, no. So yeah, and I think in that sense, it follows a very traditional publishing route, like with the editorial process. Yeah,
that's a very good point, because I'd kind of forgotten about how many rounds we did. But so the thing to keep in mind with editing, and I think it's something that takes a long time for authors to get used to, is that the idea is never to change the voice of the writer. And it's really not focused on changing the story either. It's about making sure that you're getting the story to where it needs to be in order for the flow to work as well as it should. Mm-hmm. So the idea is, when you're reading a book, you should be so immersed in that book that you don't stumble over certain things, right? There are always stumbling blocks in everyone's writing, but there are things that will catch you out, things that make people say, wait, that doesn't seem quite right, or I'm not sure that character would say that, or things that make you dislike the character, right? Where we don't want people to dislike the character. So there's a lot of things that we went through when we were doing content edits that were focused on that. And one of the things that I found in working with Mango and Marigold is how often the books that we're working on have been whitewashed before we get them. So less true for you, Payal, but pretty commonly you see books where the undertone or the experience of the author has actually been cut out or sort of covered with something that they think is going to be more accessible. So very often what we have to do is push out on getting that cultural experience back in the books, making sure that those books actually are reflecting something special. And in this case, it was much more about things like, one of them was the name of the world, right? Wasn't that one of the main things?
Well,
in one of our first conversations, it might have been our first conversation, poor Payal.
Yes.
I asked her if she had Googled some of the names of the fantastical things. So as aspiring writers, a quick tip: when you make up new words, Google them. Always Google them, for 2 reasons. Number 1, sometimes you think you made it up, but you didn't make it up, right? It came from somewhere. So I think in your case, you pulled the term from the name of a flower.
Yes.
Right. But someone else had thought of the same thing.
Yes, Dungeons and Dragons, no less, I think it was. I don't play video games. I know of the video game, but I didn't know that.
I don't think Dungeons and Dragons is a video game.
No, it's not. It's a role-playing game. But it was actually not Dungeons and Dragons. It was World of Warcraft.
It was World of Warcraft. Oh, yes. Potato. In my world, that's potato. I just lost a few readers right now. Oops.
But yeah, so unfortunately, I think that was in our first conversation that we actually had about the book, was me asking you if you had Googled things, and you said no. And then I said, well, I Googled it. And it's, so now you have to go back.
And you have to change the name. And that was one of the hardest things I had to do. And she's like, don't worry, I've done this too in my life. And a lot of fantasy writers do this. And I was like, okay. So like, you know, it's like second skin to me, the name of that realm that I had to change now. It almost felt like Rhea's gone someplace else entirely. Like, what? And it was, I think, one of the very last changes I made. So I did all of the developmental changes. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to now just find another name and do a, you know, find and replace sort of thing so that it didn't throw me off. Like, it was that difficult an edit to make. But I think I landed on a good name.
You picked a good name.
Yeah.
I can't even remember what it was.
Thank you.
Amaranth.
I know, but Amaranth. Yeah. But this is also after a flower, the aster flower. So, you know, I kept my theme and I kept my A.
My heart breaks for you, Payal. That's a dark day. Have you Googled this? Because I have. Oh, ow.
I'm so sorry.
Good for you for getting up the next day and going on with it. It sounds like all's well that ends well, and you will never not Google a thing again.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
So that's the content part, right? So that's, I mean, and that was a full-time, that was a lot of work. Not because the book wasn't in great shape already. It's just building it into the place where it needed to be. And again, like, Payal is an incredible writer. So a lot of this wasn't about writing. It was about smoothing out certain places and asking questions that sometimes nobody wants to have asked. One of our beta readers, who's also one of my beta readers, would ask questions and we would be like, now we have to go back and fix this because somebody caught it, right? Like 3 or 4 people had already read it and not noticed. And now she's like, wait, didn't they walk through that door on the way in? No. Where's the door? Why can't they just walk back out the door? And you're like, no, now we have to fix this.
Yeah. There was another point that you made, which will always stick with me. This is again in our first round, where Amy pointed out that, you know, since this is middle grade, I had to show a lot more sort of mental monologue of Rhea to make a reader that may have not got the reasoning for a particular decision that she has taken in the book or an action that she's about to take and may not understand the internal conflict because I didn't expand on that. And so I remember she told me that whenever Rhea makes a decision or she does something where she has to have a reaction to it, just write about it. Like, you know, let the reader know what she's thinking about. So I'm like throughout the book? She's like, throughout the book. And I'm just like, okay, like Rhea is the main character, like she's pretty much reacting and making decisions on every page. And then I was like, okay, Amy, but my book's already really long. If I add more, she's like, that's fine. It's easier to cut down. We'll take stuff out, but just write it. And I was like, wow.
Oh no.
Oh no. No, I really was like, oh no. And I had to sit with that one for a long time. But it's something that, I mean, when I finished doing even as I was doing the edits, and once I got into the sort of flow and the swing of things as to, you know, I could tell when I needed to insert something, and I didn't have to do it every single time, but, you know, in really important points, which was still like several times in the book. I mean, large parts of the book. But I remember then telling Amy when I submitted or when we were having our talk about when she had read that edit, I said this was like, it was one of the best critiques I'd ever received, specifically because I'm writing middle grade and, you know, we say 8 to 12. And so if there is an 8-year-old who can read, and it is slightly upper middle grade, but if there is an 8-year-old who, you know, can read the book, they might need just a little nudge in the direction that, you know, they need to go and to avoid them getting confused. And it also helped really flush out, you know, Rhea's character, and I got to know her so much more than I did, and that's why I say that it added depth to the book, because we didn't change any plot point. I don't think we've changed a single plot point, or the arc or anything, but it just added such depth and dimension to the plot and the character. And I will always remember that, and that I hopefully have kept that in mind in the sequel. I mean, it's just draft one, but that's also, I think, a great tip for any middle grade writer is to, put that in a monologue, especially for your main characters, and then, in revisions you can, cut out and edit stuff that you think, doesn't need to be there because it's too much. But that was a great tip.
Sailaja, I'm going to throw this over to you. When Amy and Payal are having good-natured, friendly disagreements about what's best for the book, whether or not Googling things matters, and whatever else might come up, do you come in? Are you the peacemaker between them to make sure everybody stays friends? I mean, we got 2 more books. We gotta keep the band together.
The band is definitely staying together. At least I certainly hope so, and dream so, and believe so. I think when there are arguments, I don't know that there are. That sounds like I really don't. I don't mean that because I'm trying to be like polite or something. Like, I genuinely think the two of them handle the conversation. And then if it's a bigger deal, I do think Amy is probably the one who brings it up to me. And that's probably the right way to do it. She's our editor, and so she'll talk me through it. And usually it's not a big deal. Like, I remember the changing of the name. She's like, girl, like, that's how Amy was like, girl, Googled the name. We cannot use it. And I was like, okay, just tell Payal to pick whatever else. Like, I was like, all right, that seems fine. And Payal's like, that was like changing the name of my child.
Yes.
5 years after I had them. And so it was pretty terrifying, I'm sure. I think they just work it out, and then some decisions are mine. Like, sometimes I'm like, no, we're not going to change the size to this size. We will change it to maybe this size, and then that's fine. Yeah. It's little things like that.
Yeah.
Amy, if you're talking, you're on mute.
You're on mute. Yeah.
Thank you. I was talking. I would say that when you're working with an author, one of the biggest things is making sure that the author knows that whatever you're trying to do, whatever you're trying to change, is to bring their voice forward. So when you talk to someone that way, they're less likely to push back and tell you that they don't want to do it, because usually if you're talking to them in the right way, they know that you're on the same side, right? So unfortunately, like, when I'm laughing at some of the things that we're talking about, it's because I now know Payal much better than I did in that first conversation when I was like, I Googled it, it's bad, you got to change it, right? Like, now I would be a little bit more gentle when I brought something like that up. But I do think that establishing a rapport with an author is all about helping them to know that none of this is about changing their baby or making it about somebody else, right? That's never going to be the goal. The goal is always to present the best version of their work. So asking the questions and bringing thoughts about, narration forward, it was always about getting the best Rhea that we could get, right? Yeah. And as a result, I don't think we had any conflicts. Maybe you just didn't tell me. Maybe you were emailing Sailaja and being like,
no,
this terrible. But no, because it's not about what I want versus what someone else wants. It's about agreeing on the best path forward.
Agreed, absolutely. And I think even when we were going through certain comments and stuff like that, that we would both discuss them. And Amy you always heard me, and you were, unless it was, for all of the really big points, I think we were on board, like, completely. On the gray ones, she would be like, she was about it, and I was like, no, but Amy, I really want this sentence in, I really want to use this word, or she was like, okay. And then, vice versa. Sometimes she felt more strongly about something, and I was just like, Amy, let's just delete it, Amy. Like, it's fine. It's okay. And so yeah, I think we lucked out in that sense, that for the important points, we were always on the same page. And I always felt Amy was on my side. So it's like, fine, I'll make that change.
Next time we do this, I'm going to start a vicious rumor between you two, so we get a little excited conflict, and we'll have ourselves a nice time.
Oh, I know. We're just like, we really love each other. We don't have conflict. We just get along. We just talk. Yeah.
It makes for a fantastic working relationship, a less conflict-driven podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair.
Sailaja, now that the book's been edited, everything's been Googled, we put together the perfect manuscript to put out there in the world. Coming up on launch, what preparations are being made? How do you go about marketing and letting the world know that this book exists?
Yeah, so our marketing work starts really early on. It starts with the pre-order campaign, which starts with a reveal of the cover. It's a cover reveal campaign, and the first week of pre-orders are really important to us and really help us to understand how a book is going to do in the marketplace. Then there's usually the book will remain on pre-order on our website, and what that usually means for our viewers or readers, listeners, what that means is there's bonuses. Like, you just get some cool stuff when you pre-order the book, and it's really helpful for us as an indie press because it helps to offset the printing costs of the book. After that, it's going to be 4 or 5 months. It's going to go through its sort of print process. You're going to get pass-through pages and stuff like that. And then I'll go to the printer. And then it will be made into like a real life book, which is kind of a terrifying feeling for me. I don't know. This is like the first really big book that we've made. I'm just like sort of scared at how much room it's going to take up in a warehouse. Really weird things like that. And what we will do, hopefully imagining a time where we can all be together, is Payal will start her small sort of tour of the US, going to a lot of indie bookstores, hopefully schools, meeting with kids, and talking about her book, reading parts of her book. While she finishes drafting, book 2, and starts writing book 3, and then the next series that I'm gonna buy, no big deal. No pressure. But, I think we are planning some really exciting marketing stuff to go along with our release campaign or the time leading up to the culmination of the book. And if we're in a virtual time, then I think we'll do as much as we can virtually. We'll probably do some virtual bookstore readings, see if we can get to schools, because I think no matter what, this book is going to be out there, and we want the world to see it and hear it and love it.
Well, here is my last question about the book, because then we got to talk flying saucers and ghosts. The esteemed audience looks forward to it. And if they don't, I do. So either way. But I always try to do this show as so if I were going to be on a podcast, what would I want someone to ask me? And I'd want somebody to give me a spot to talk about any aspect of the book that hasn't yet come up. So what's a question that I haven't asked you that you'd like to be asked about the book or about publishing in general? And then please proceed to answer it. And we'll start with, let's say, Payal.
Oh, my. Oh, if either one of you have a question in mind, jump in.
Nope, you may jump on this bullet. You got to take it.
Okay. Okay. I think for me, we did touch upon this, but I think the question has always been Astranthia and it being this blended sort of world, and the fact that I think the question would be what I want a reader to take out of this book, and that would be, I want all kids, I hope, and I want all kids of all cultures and races and nationalities to read this book, because it is a universal book. It's a book with themes that every kid can relate to. It's not an Indian book with an Indian character, with an Indian fantasy that will only speak to an Indian reader. I think that's unfortunately, a rhetoric that is just assumed when it comes to books with, someone that doesn't look like you on the cover. I want to say that I grew up reading books with white characters and Western characters. I love reading books with Asian characters and African characters, and I love them. I feel like they move me because they're human stories. And for any parent out there who's listening to this podcast, any kid, any teacher, any librarian, it is important to include diverse books in your catalog for your kids because of that very reason, to show that diversity is everywhere. You're different from your own neighbor, even if you look the same way. You've grown up differently, you have different experiences in the same way that you have different experiences from someone who has lived, 7 seas across. But that human feeling is completely relatable and very universal. So whether you are of any culture or any race or any nationality, if you love reading adventure and you love middle grade, you will enjoy this book and it will speak to you.
Well done. That's going to be a tough act to follow. Amy, have you got one?
Oh, no.
Did you think they'd forget you?
No, I was hoping you would go next. So I would say, from an editorial perspective, a question that I think a lot of the time I wish I were asked is, how hard is it to get published? Which is like kind of a big question and a hard question to answer. And I think that the answer to that question is it's impossible to know how hard it's going to be. It's impossible to know how many rounds of edits you're going to need because all of it falls into the category of right place and right time, getting the right person to read your book. If you look at Payal's work, so much of it comes down to finding the right person to read it. And, all the other people who read it loved it. It's not that people didn't love it, but so much of it comes down to luck and also finding the right person who really understands it. And even then we took a year, right, of editing and revising and getting it to another place. And I think that anyone out there who's writing right now should remember that it's not just about talent and it's not just about getting the story right. It's also a huge process, and going through that process can be really difficult and really hard. But if you don't give up, you could be on this podcast next year.
And all your dreams will have come true.
And all of your dreams will have come true.
Most of them.
Sailaja, there can be no more stalling. The spotlight is on you.
I know, that's a little terrifying. I guess the question I wish you had asked me about publishing or being an indie publisher is, how can people support you? And I think the best way to support us is to, one, follow us on social media and regularly share our posts in your feed with your friends, with a relative, whatever it might be. That truly does help and it costs you nothing. The second way you can support us is when you do want to buy our books, pre-order them early, knowing that they might take 6 months to get to you, but appreciating that you're supporting a small indie press, and buying your books direct from us. That is always incredibly helpful and helps us to keep more profit in our pockets. And then finally, make sure you shop at your independent bookstore and tell them about us. Because that way, once they find out about us, then they're able to buy their books directly from us. And that's always a really wonderful thing.
Now we enter the weird stuff. And Sailaja, you're going first. Have you ever seen a ghost, a flying saucer, or any other supernatural being?
I have never seen a supernatural being. At least I don't think so. But I was a really big fan of Roswell, the TV show that aired in the late 90s, early 2000s on the WB network. And so I believe aliens and ghosts are out there. I just don't think I've seen them.
Amy?
So I think I may have seen a flying saucer once when I was a kid at camp in Western Mass, because you can see so much. So I grew up on Long Island, so we could see like 2 stars. No joke. I think that was the maximum number of stars that I ever saw in my childhood, except in the summertime, because I would go to camp in Western Massachusetts, and I swear once I did see a strange light that sort of sped. It moved slow and then it moved really fast. And I got really excited about it and nobody else saw it. But fun fact, I also wrote fan fiction about Roswell, and it was one of the first times that I wrote stories. So
I can't believe I didn't know that about you. Oh, I love you so much more.
And I was a huge X-Files fan. In fact, my screen name on AIM, which was an old... Yeah, I know. Everyone's making a face.
Because I also had an AIM screen name.
Everyone, right. So AIM was this sort of old version of chat, like an old version of Messenger, I guess. And my handle was Xfile, XPHILE 36, because just Xfile was taken, so I had to add 36 on the end.
It's amazing.
Oh yes, I remember those days so vividly.
I think you need to change the names on that Roswell fan fiction, and Mango Marigold can make a special spot just for that.
Oh my God, can you imagine? I'd read it. It would get, it would come into my inbox, and at some point I'd read it and I'd be like, "What is this? All right."
And Payal, to you, ghosts, flying saucers, supernatural being, anything like that?
Well, not me particularly, though I would be stoked to, I don't know, run into a ghost. But my husband, then boyfriend, has had several encounters with them, with ghosts or spirits maybe. And he had it in his apartment back in Mumbai, where he was on his study table doing his thing, and there was a water bottle that was full up on a cabinet, and it didn't just fall, it flew in an arc, just out of nowhere. It just flung itself, and he has seen her, and when he was younger, he had told his parents, and they thought he was imagining things. And then his uncle spent the night in that room many years later, and then reported the exact same description to his parents, saying that, "Do you know your house is haunted? There is this lady." And they were shocked out of their mind. And so then they did this Indian sort of ritual that removes a spirit from a house, but she still persisted. He has seen her occasionally every now and again. His sister has actually physically felt her in bed, she can feel a pressure on her and stuff. So she never sleeps in that room, and she's nearly 30. And then one time I told him, he called me up, he was like, the phone is we used to have these landlines, and it had this little green screen on it where you could access the menu and then go to different things. And he was like, "I'm hearing beeping on this phone, and the buttons weren't getting pressed, you wouldn't see them, but it would be you would hear the click of the menu opening, and then it would go scroll down to contacts and scroll to messages." Ooh. And he's calling me up, and I'm like, "What?" I'm take a video, because up until this point, I've only heard stories, right? And we both love horror movies, especially, possessions and stuff like that. We both are suckers for that kind of stuff. So I was like, "Will you take a video recording? Because I've never ever seen it." And he did, and I saw it. So I haven't personally had that experience,
But you did see the experience of somebody else, because that video was convincing, right?
It was convincing.
And we can find it on your website.
Like an
You can
electrical
upload it to
circuit
YouTube.
thing. I don't know.
Where's the video now?
Well, this was way back. We've been together we've been together 10 years. So I think this was probably 7 years ago. This is when we had like
on
the
an old
first
Nokia
smartphones out. So unfortunately, I think it's
You have to flip it and like.
Yeah, basically. So it's somewhere in it's somewhere in the cloud. I don't know.
Maybe throw out old Valentine's. Don't throw out the video of the ghost and the
I know. But yeah, so through osmosis I have kind of seen a ghost. I don't know. But yeah.
We'll find that video and we'll all see one. It'll be fantastic.
If I do find it.
I know.
Yeah.
Ladies, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank all three of you for being wonderful guests and just having the most excellent conversation. I'm going to ask you my final question now. My final question is always some variation. If you could go back to the start of your career and give young you some advice that would have made a huge difference for you and might make a huge difference for all of the authors and publishers and editors who are listening, what would that advice be? And Amy, I'm going to start with you.
Whoa.
Surprise.
Oh, no. Well, so my career I've always wanted to be a writer. So I knew from a very early age that was what I was going to do. I knew I was going to be telling stories and helping other people tell stories. There was just no chance that I was going to do anything else. But I also needed a job when I was young. So I worked in DC. I worked for a financial advisories company. I worked with spreadsheets and, it was a tough time for me because I felt like maybe I had deviated too far. So I think if I could talk to younger me, I would just sort of remind myself that it's a long road, and for my 20s to not have been spent writing the great American novel is not the end of the world. One of the things that always makes me feel amazing is remembering that Julia Child was in her 40s when she learned to cook. Like, to me, that is, so helpful to just remember that the thing that she's known for, she didn't do that until she was much older, until she'd had a whole life, really. And that's the way it is with writing too. It's a long process. And I think that I wish I had known that when I was younger and maybe wouldn't have beaten myself up so much about not being super successful in my youth.
Amy, where can a esteemed audience find you online, follow you on Twitter, all that good stuff?
Me?
Uh-huh.
Kraken Communications is my page. So that's Kraken Communications, and that is on Facebook. I am really terrible about Twitter, so not so great with Twitter. I sound so old, though. I sound so old.
Can we find you on America Online?
Do you have a Hotmail address? You can find Amy on the web. She's also on Facebook at Kraken Communications. We use her as an editor, but I personally use her to edit like writing of mine, and help me write stuff. She's amazing. She's amazing. And every writer, you're only as strong as a writer. You're only as strong as your edits.
100%.
So having a strong editor. Yeah, look, I mean, it's not just your edits, but your editor. It's that whole process, and you have to edit.
Well, thank you. I do have a website too. That reminds me.
You do.
I have a website. And you can message me through the website. So, because I'm 80 years old. You can't see me, so you don't know. Could be.
No, we're on YouTube this whole time. Everyone can see you. Hi, Alicia. What advice did you go back and give a younger version of yourself?
I would say just do it and do it sooner.
And where can esteemed audience find you online?
Esteemed audience can find me. I am on the Instagram because I like the gram, and you can find me there as Sailaja N Joshi. You can also find us at Mango and Marigold Press on Instagram. I occasionally tweet, often at my husband, whose only social media platform now is Twitter. And I'm sort of on Facebook. I'm on the LinkedIn, but really you should follow Mango and Marigold Press on Instagram, as well as give us your email so you can get our newsletter and get, sneak peeks at chapters of Rhea and the Blood of Nectar.
And Payal, author of Rhea and the Blood of Nectar. Bring us home. What advice would you go back and give yourself, and where can we find you online?
I think I would tell my younger self to not limit myself. I never thought that I never thought about being an author or a writer because I didn't know anyone in my family who was. I hadn't seen anyone. In India, you have some extremely talented writers, but they all write literary fiction most of the time. Things are very much changing now, but back when I was a kid, and so we're talking about a good 20 years ago, I hadn't seen that, so I never thought about it. I did write, I don't know if anyone knows this reference, but I wrote Captain Planet fan fiction.
Oh!
On a train journey when I think I was, I don't even know, maybe 10 or 11, and I still have it. It's like, I've preserved it now because I feel like that was just probably one of the most genuine outpourings of I want to write this story about these 5 kids who want to save the world. But I never thought about it again until the story I mentioned, which was I was I was like 24 or something at the time. So don't limit yourself, and don't worry about the time. Don't put that pressure on you. Kind of what Amy said, because I feel like I came to this much later in my life. I would have hoped to have come sooner. Even in my peers right now, I'm like in awe of the ones who are still in their 20s and they're on their 3rd book or 4th book, and I'm just like, wow, cool. What was I doing? But there are people there will always be people ahead of you in the race and behind you. And if you look at this as your own journey, it doesn't matter. So that's kind of what I would say. And then my social media. Oh, I am now with it. I had nothing 6 months ago. And now I have a website. You can find me at PayalDoshiAuthor.com. That's my website. I'm very active on Instagram. At Payal Doshi Author. I'm on Twitter at Payal D Writes, and I'm also on Facebook, and I think my page is called Payal Doshi Author. Try to keep it pretty standard, except for Twitter, but yep, you can find me on all the socials.
And esteemed audience, as you know, you can find everything you ever want to know about me, and more importantly, interviews with hundreds, I know thousands, of literary agents, editors, authors, publishing professionals, folks I know would interest you at middlegradeninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. And as always, God willing and I'm alive, I'll see you next week.